The vast emptiness of space had never seemed so terrifying to the Zilarians. For centuries, they had lived peacefully on their lush homeworld, developing their civilization without the constant threat of predators or natural disasters that shaped so many other species. The Zilarians evolved in harmony with their environment. Tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin that reflected their planet's perpetual spring. When archaeologists discovered the ancient communication device buried beneath the crystal forests of their southern continent, the Zilarian Council viewed it as a fascinating historical artifact. None could have predicted how desperately they would need it. "The transmission is ready," said Chief Communicator Vela, her delicate fingers hovering over the control panel. "We have no guarantee anyone will hear us." High Counselor Fellows nodded solemnly. "We have no choice. The Vorlaf ships will reach our outer settlements within days." The distress signal pulsed outward, carrying the desperate plea of a peaceful race facing extinction at the hands of the Vorlaf Empire. Conquerors who saw the Zilarians' lack of natural defenses as weakness to be exploited. Light years away, aboard the patrol vessel Horizon, Captain Lisa Daniels frowned at the unexpected alert on her command console. After 15 years in the Earth Defense Force, she had encountered many things in the frontier of space, but never a first contact scenario. "What do we have, Monroe?" she asked her communications officer. "It's a distress signal, Captain. Non-human origin. Universal mathematical sequences, followed by what appears to be a language we've never encountered." Captain Daniels stood, brushing back her short brown hair, routed through the universal translator. "Let's see what we've got." The bridge crew watched as the alien message took form on their screens, a desperate plea for help against an overwhelming enemy. Along with the message came stellar coordinates, biological data, and brief cultural information. Everything a potential ally would need. "They're calling themselves Zilarians," Monroe said. "Based on these coordinates, they're in the Cygnus Arm, about 3 weeks' travel at maximum speed." Lisa studied the biological information with particular interest. "Look at their environmental data. Their planet has minimal temperature variation, almost no tectonic activity, extremely low gravity, and filtered stellar radiation." She whistled softly. "No wonder they're having trouble defending themselves." Lieutenant Ryan Cooper, the ship's tactical officer, leaned forward. "They wouldn't last a day on Earth, and that's probably why they're reaching out," Lisa replied. "They need help from those who evolved in harsher conditions." The command crew fell silent, understanding the implications. Earth had been classified as a death world by the few alien species humans had encountered, a planet whose extreme conditions had forced its inhabitants to develop exceptional strength, endurance, and adaptability just to survive. "Send a response," Lisa decided. "Let them know we're coming. Then contact Earth Command. We're going to need authorization and reinforcements." 3 weeks later, the Zilarians gathered anxiously as the human ship entered their star system. Their initial relief at receiving a response quickly turned to concern when they studied the biological data the humans had shared. "They evolved on a world with constant disasters," whispered Counselor Ilara. "Their planet has killed most of their species multiple times throughout their history." High Counselor Thelos watched the approaching ship on their monitors. "And yet they survived. They adapted." A rare smile crossed his face. "Perhaps that is exactly what we need against the Vorlaf." As Captain Daniels prepared to lead the first diplomatic party to the Zilarian surface, she couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. Earth had never played the role of protector to another species before. The Zilarians had called for help, expecting benevolent saviors. Instead, they were getting Deathworlders, humans who had been forged in the crucible of Earth's merciless evolution. What they didn't yet understand was that sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters. Commander Alan Garcia stepped onto the soil of the Zilarian homeworld and immediately felt as if he were walking on a cloud. The gravity was barely 60% of Earth's, making his movements awkwardly bouncy despite the weighted gear. "Easy steps, team," he cautioned as the assessment crew followed him out of the shuttle. "Remember your low-gravity training." 5 Earth Defense Force specialists spread out around him, each chosen for their expertise in first contact scenarios. Olivia Bennett, the xenobiologist, was already taking air samples, her eyes wide with wonder. "The oxygen content is remarkably high," she observed, checking her instruments. "And almost no pollutants. I've never seen readings like this outside of simulations." Paul Martinez, the cultural anthropologist, was documenting the Zolarian greeting party that approached them. The aliens moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost choreographed, their tall, slender bodies swaying gently as they walked. "Welcome to Zolara," said the leader, whose name translated as Silver Mist. "We are grateful for your swift response to our call." Alen nodded respectfully. "We came as soon as we received your message. I'm Commander Garcia, leading our assessment team." As they were escorted to the Zolarian capital, the humans struggled to hide their amazement. The city seemed to grow organically from the landscape, crystalline spires and arching bridges blending perfectly with the colorful vegetation. There were no defensive walls, no military checkpoints, not even the concept of secured borders. "They're completely vulnerable," security specialist Diane Foster whispered to Alan. "I haven't seen a single weapon or defense system." Alan nodded grimly. The Zolarians had evolved on a world without major predators or natural disasters. Their society had never needed to develop the concept of warfare until the Vorlath arrived. In the Grand Meeting Hall, the Zolarian Council presented holographic images of the Vorlath threat. The conquering species appeared reptilian with heavily armored exoskeletons and specialized appendages evolved for combat. "They've taken 3 of our outer colony worlds," explained High Counselor Thylos. "We had no defenses in place. Our people have never needed them." While Olivia and Paul remained with the Council to learn more about Zolarian biology and culture, Alan and the security team ventured to the planet's highest observation point to set up surveillance equipment. From there, they could monitor the approach vectors the Vorlath might use. Their entire evolutionary history is without significant challenge, Olivia reported later that evening as the team gathered in their temporary quarters. "They've never faced natural selection pressures like we have on Earth." Paul nodded, reviewing his cultural notes. "Their entire society is built on cooperation. They don't even have a concept for competitive sports or games. The closest thing they have to conflict resolution is communal meditation." Alan studied the tactical display showing the known positions of Vorlath ships. And now they're facing an enemy that evolved specifically for conquest. "It gets worse," Diane added, sliding a data tablet across the table. "I've analyzed the Vorlath battle patterns from the data the Zolarians provided. They're methodical, precise, and absolutely merciless. They're targeting the most peaceful worlds first, the easiest conquests." The team fell silent, contemplating the implications. Earth Command would need to make a decision soon about whether and how to intervene. "We can help them," Alan finally said, "but they need to understand what that means. We don't fight like the Vorlath. We don't have their rigid battle patterns or specialized biology." Olivia looked up from her notes. "What do we have?" Alan's expression hardened. "Adaptability, creativity, the willingness to fight dirty when necessary, all the traits that come from surviving a death world." He stared out at the peaceful Zolarian night. "The question is whether they're ready for allies like us." Back on the horizon, Captain Lisa Daniels was having the same conversation with Earth Command, unaware that the Vorlath were already much closer than anyone had realized. No one saw the Vorlath scout ships coming. They slipped past the outer sensor grid that the Earth team had hastily installed around the Zolarian colony of New Dawn, a small settlement of researchers studying native flora. Lieutenant Eric Hammond was testing the colony's new emergency protocols when the first plasma blast hit the central research dome. "Everyone to the shelters," he shouted, grabbing his rifle. The Zolarians froze in panic, their iridescent skin paling to a sickly white. "Move. Now." The small human contingent, just 6 soldiers stationed as trainers, sprang into action. They had been selected from Earth's special forces, each experienced in operating in hostile environments. Eric had fought in the asteroid belt rebellions and understood what it meant to be outgunned. Ramirez, Lopes, get the civilians to the underground lab. Jordan and Chen with me. The Vorlath warriors that emerged from the scout ship stood over 8 feet tall, their armored bodies bristling with natural weapons. They moved with mechanical precision, each step calculated, each formation perfect. Their tactics had overwhelmed dozens of peaceful worlds before, but they had never faced humans. Eric watched their approach through his scope. They're moving in standard attack formation, he observed. No adaptation to the terrain. Private Chen nodded, adjusting her position behind a fallen tree. They don't even have rear guards. They're not expecting resistance. Let's surprise them. Then, the humans didn't engage head-on. Instead, they used guerrilla tactics, striking from cover, changing positions, creating confusion. The Vorlath, expecting to find only frightened Solarians, were unprepared for the chaotic movements of Earth's soldiers. They can't track multiple targets, Eric realized, watching a Vorlath warrior fire repeatedly at his previous position while he flanked from another angle. They're programmed for direct confrontation, not adaptation. When one of the Vorlath commanders fell to Chen's precision shot, the invaders briefly froze, as if unable to process the loss of leadership. Eric seized the moment. Concentrate fire on the central unit. The humans poured rounds into the command Vorlath, whose specialized communication organs were visible as glowing nodes on its carapace. When it finally collapsed, the remaining warriors fell into disarray. Meanwhile, inside the underground lab, medic Sofia Rodriguez worked frantically to treat injured Solarians. Their biology was dramatically different from humans, transparent skin that revealed a network of light-conducting vessels instead of blood. But trauma was trauma, and Sophia's skilled hands moved with calm precision. "You're safe now," she reassured a young Zilarian whose arm had been severed by shrapnel. The aliens were astonished to see their limbs regenerating rapidly under her care, a natural ability they possessed, but had rarely needed to use. "Why do you not fear?" asked the injured Zilarian. Sophia smiled grimly as she applied a healing gel. "On Earth, every day can bring disaster. We learn to function in crisis from childhood." Above ground, the tide had turned. The remaining Vorlath retreated to their ships, leaving behind their dead and wounded, a concept that seemed foreign to their hive-minded strategy. As the scout ships disappeared into the atmosphere, communications specialist Daniel Murphy intercepted their transmission back to the main fleet. "Sir," he called to Eric, "you need to hear this." The translation was rough, but clear enough. "Withdraw immediately. Colony defended by Deathworlders." Repeat. "Deathworlders present. Request new tactical parameters." Eric stared at the sky where the ships had vanished. "They're afraid of us." When Captain Daniels arrived with reinforcements an hour later, she found something unexpected. The Zilarian colonists were not hiding in terror, but working alongside the humans to strengthen defenses. "They fought for us," explained the colony leader, gesturing to the tired human soldiers. "Not as we expected. They moved like water, not like stone. They embraced chaos rather than order." Daniels watched as Zilarians carefully studied human defensive positions. "They're learning from you," she told Eric. "And we're learning from them," he replied, nodding toward Sophia, who was teaching Zilarian healers to use their regenerative abilities more effectively in emergency situations. It was just one colony, one skirmish. But word spread quickly through both human and Zilarian communications networks. The Deathworlders had drawn first blood, and the Vorlath had retreated. News of the successful defense at New Dawn spread quickly across the galaxy. Within days, representatives from 3 previously unknown species arrived at Silara, each bearing similar stories of Vorlath aggression, and each desperate for human assistance. Admiral William Foster stepped off his shuttle onto the newly constructed landing pad at the Zilarian capital. Unlike the assessment team before him, He arrived with full military honors. Earth was no longer testing the waters but making a statement. The Vorlath pattern is clear, he explained to the gathered representatives in the Grand Chamber. They target species that evolved on gentle worlds, those who never developed strong defensive instincts. They've been methodically harvesting the galaxy's peaceful civilizations. The chamber filled with nervous murmurs. The Florians, plant-based beings with flowering appendages, trembled visibly. The gelatinous Mori representatives rippled with anxiety colors. Only the crystalline Axoni maintained their rigid composure, though the frequency of their light speech increased noticeably. "We propose a coalition," Foster continued, his weathered face serious under the gentle blue light of the chamber. "Earth will provide military protection and training. In exchange, we ask for technological and resource partnerships." The Mori spokesperson pulsed forward. "Why would humans defend species not your own? What benefit is there in protecting worlds you could simply claim after the Vorlath destroy our civilizations?" Engineer Nicole Carter, standing beside the Admiral, stepped forward. Though not a diplomat, she understood the question's importance. "Because Earth didn't survive its harshness by destroying cooperation," she explained. "We survived through adaptation and mutual support. Those are the skills of our death world, not just fighting, but thriving together through adversity." To demonstrate, she activated a holographic display showing hybrid technology she developed by merging human weapons systems with Zilarian light-focusing crystals, creating defense platforms that could draw power directly from stellar radiation. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Imagine what we could create by combining human resilience with your species' unique evolutionary advantages." The alien representatives moved closer, captivated by possibilities they'd never considered. The Florians, with their ability to process solar energy at incredible efficiency. The Mori, whose fluid bodies could flow through spaces no solid form could navigate. The Axoni, whose crystalline minds could perform calculations beyond the fastest human computers. "We don't want subjects or dependents," Admiral Foster clarified. "We want allies who can eventually defend themselves." Over the following weeks, the structure of the coalition took shape. Human military advisors were dispatched to vulnerable worlds. Alien scientists arrived on Earth-controlled planets, marveling at the harsh conditions humans considered normal. Not everything went smoothly. Cultural clashes emerged daily. The Florians were horrified by human dietary habits. The Mori couldn't comprehend human concepts of individual identity. The Axoni found human emotional responses bewildering and inefficient. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper watched with amusement as a group of Zilarian military trainees struggled through their first Earth standard gravity exercise, their willowy bodies straining against weights that would be light for a human child. "Keep going," he encouraged. "Your bodies will adapt faster than you think." A Zilarian collapsed, breathing heavily. "How do you live like this every day?" she gasped. Ryan smiled. "On Earth, we call this taking it easy." Across the room, Nickel struggled to understand the Axoni engineer as they collaborated on defensive shield technology. The crystalline being communicated through light pulses that the translator rendered imperfectly. "No, the energy flow cannot." The translation broke down into incomprehensible fragments. Nickel sighed, then had an idea. She took the Axoni's equivalent of a hand and placed it on the machinery, demonstrating through touch rather than words. The Axoni vibrated with sudden understanding. On the flagship orbiting Zilara, Admiral Foster received the communication he'd been waiting for. The Galactic Council, a loose association of spacefaring civilizations, had formally recognized the coalition. "They're calling it the Deathworld Alliance," his aide informed him. Foster nodded, watching the fleet exercises through the viewport. Dozens of ships from 6 different species were performing coordinated maneuvers. "Appropriate enough," he said. "But I think the Vorlath will soon have a different name for us." "What's that, sir?" The Admiral's lips curved slightly. "Their worst nightmare." Captain Frank Delgado stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship Defiance, watching as the combined fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. Ahead lay Morvis Prime, a mineral-rich planet that had been one of the Vorlath's first conquests. Intelligence suggested it now served as a major staging ground for their continued expansion. All ships in position, reported his second-in-command. The Zalarian light cruisers are maintaining their screening formation. Mori infiltration pods are prepped for deployment. Frank nodded, his dark eyes fixed on the tactical display. This would be the Alliance's first offensive operation, a test of whether such diverse species could function as a cohesive fighting force. Tactical. What's our status? Frank asked. Maria Hernandez, the ship's tactical officer, studied her displays intently. Her reputation for unpredictable battle strategies had earned her both admiration and concern among the alien allies. Vorlath Defense Grid is activating exactly as predicted, she reported. They're deploying in their standard orbital formation, rigid and mathematically perfect. A slight smile crossed her face. Too perfect. Elaborate, Frank requested. Maria highlighted sections of the enemy formation. They're positioning according to calculated optimal coverage, not accounting for the actual terrain features of the planet below. If we approach from these vectors, she indicated 3 unlikely angles. Their sensors will be partially blocked by the planet's unusual magnetic field distortions. Frank considered this. They're not adapting to local conditions. They never do, sir. Their tactics are programmed, not improvised. Frank opened a channel to the fleet. All ships implement Battle Plan Hydra. Pilots Claire Jackson and Stephen Perez, you're cleared to execute your atmospheric maneuver. The 2 pilots acknowledged from their specialized strike craft. Claire's voice was calm but excited, ready to show these bugs something they've never seen before. The Vorlath commanders detected the approaching fleet and responded with textbook precision. Their battleships arranged in perfect geometric patterns, energy weapons charged in synchronized sequences. By all conventional tactical assessments, the Alliance ships were outgunned and outnumbered. But humans had never relied on conventional tactics. While the main fleet engaged the Vorlath in a seemingly straightforward confrontation, Claire and Stephen led their squadron of 20 strike craft toward the planet's surface, diving deep into the atmosphere at angles the Vorlath defense systems classified as non-survivable. Hitting air density threshold, Stephen called out as his ship shuddered violently. Hull temperature climbing. Claire's voice remained steady despite the warning alarms blaring in her cockpit. Just like we practiced in the Jupiter dive runs. Trust your instincts, not your instruments. The maneuver they were attempting had been deemed theoretically impossible by Alliance engineers, using the planet's upper atmosphere to superheat their craft's specialized shields, then channeling that energy into a burst that would temporarily blind Vorlath sensors while simultaneously boosting them back to orbital altitude directly beneath the enemy fleet. As they pulled their ships through the impossible turn, oxygen alarms wailed. 3 pilots lost consciousness from the G-forces, their automated systems barely keeping them alive. Now, Claire shouted as they reached the apex. 20 ships erupted from the atmosphere in a blinding burst of energy, emerging directly beneath the precisely arranged Vorlath fleet. The enemy ships, their sensors overloaded and their rigid formation unprepared for attack from below, had no time to reorient their weapons. From the Defiance, Frank watched as the strike team tore through the underside of the Vorlath formation. Main fleet, advance now. All ships, target the disrupted sectors. The battle lasted just under 3 hours. When it ended, the Vorlath presence on Morvis Prime had been completely eliminated. As Alliance ships began landing on the surface, they discovered something unexpected. Thousands of native Morvians emerging from underground shelters, their insectoid features showing signs of prolonged resistance against their conquerors. "We have been fighting alone for years," their leader told Frank through a translator. "We never expected rescue." Frank gazed across the gathered Morvians, then at the diverse Alliance forces securing the planet. "You're not alone anymore." Back on the Defiance, Maria updated the strategic maps, marking 3 more planets now within striking distance of the Alliance. The Vorlath are scrambling to adjust their defensive positions, she noted. They've never faced an enemy that could take back a conquered world. Frank studied the star chart. Then let's show them it wasn't a fluke. By the end of the month, 3 more worlds had been liberated, each victory fueling the Alliance's confidence and crushing the Vorlath's once fearsome reputation. The Deathworlders hadn't just answered a cry for help, they had changed the rules of the war. The Alliance war room fell silent as the holographic display updated, revealing the location that had eluded them for months. The Vorlath homeworld. Chief Science Officer Gregory Thompson had finally decoded the patterns in the captured Vorlath navigation data. They'd hidden it well, Gregory explained, manipulating the display to zoom in on a star system partially obscured by a dense nebula. Their home system is surrounded by artificial radiation fields designed to mimic natural phenomena. No wonder our scouts never found it. Major Laura Collins studied the readings with narrowed eyes. She had commanded special operations for 15 years before joining the Alliance, and her instincts were rarely wrong. There's something else, she said. Look at the planetary conditions. Gregory nodded, highlighting the environmental data. That's what's most interesting. The Vorlath homeworld shows evidence of once being what we classify as a semi-death world: high gravity, extreme temperature variations, significant tectonic activity. Similar to Earth? Asked Admiral Foster. Not quite as harsh as Earth, but challenging enough to produce a species with natural armor and defensive capabilities. Gregory confirmed. But here's the anomaly. The geological record shows these conditions have been artificially stabilized for at least 10,000 years. The implications dawned on the assembled leaders. The Vorlath hadn't evolved as pure conquerors. They had engineered their entire society around warfare after first developing in harsh conditions similar to humanity's. They're like us, Laura muttered. Or at least they were. Security specialist Kevin Phillips, who had been analyzing captured Vorlath technology, stepped forward. There's more, sir. Their battle programming isn't just tactical doctrine. It's literally programmed. Their warriors are partially cybernetic, with combat routines hardwired into their nervous systems. He projected images of Vorlath neural architecture. They've sacrificed adaptability for perfect execution of predetermined strategies. They can't improvise because they've been engineered not to. Admiral Foster absorbed this information, then addressed Laura directly. Major Collins, I need a small team to infiltrate the Vorlath command center. We need to understand exactly what we're facing before we commit to a full assault. Laura nodded. I'll need volunteers comfortable with high-risk infiltration. 3 days later, Laura led her team of 6 through the outer defenses of the Vorlath homeworld. They wore modified Mori-human hybrid suits that allowed them to shift their density, slipping through security scanners designed to detect solid matter. Remember, Laura whispered as they approached the central complex, we're here for intelligence, not confrontation. The massive structure before them pulsed with blue energy. Unlike the elegant architecture of the Zolarians or the natural formations favored by the Florians, the Vorlath buildings were brutally functional, all sharp angles and reinforced barriers. Kevin Phillips worked quickly to bypass the security systems, his fingers dancing across his specialized interface. I'm in their networks, he reported, downloading their central database now. What they discovered inside shook them to their core. The Vorlath weren't simply conquerors. They were the product of millennia of self-directed evolution. Generation after generation, they had selectively bred and later genetically engineered themselves to be perfect warriors, sacrificing creativity, emotion, and individuality in the process. They've been trying to create the perfect species, Kevin said, his voice hollow as he scanned through genetic records. Each conquered world provides new genetic material for their experiments. Laura moved deeper into the facility, finally reaching what appeared to be a historical archive. The visual records confirmed Gregory's theory. The early Vorlath had indeed evolved on a challenging world, developing their armor and strength naturally. But over time, They had turned to technology and genetic manipulation, seeking to eliminate what they saw as weaknesses. They've engineered out their own capacity for empathy, Laura realized. They don't conquer out of hatred or greed. They do it because they've programmed themselves to see it as the optimal survival strategy. As the team prepared to extract with their intelligence, Laura faced a moral dilemma. Their explosives expert had identified the central power core. A single detonation could cripple the entire Vorlath civilization, potentially ending the war in one stroke. "We have the capacity to end this now," her weapons officer pointed out. "One command, and it's over." Laura stared at the pulsing core, thinking of all the worlds that had suffered under Vorlath invasion. "No," she finally decided. "We didn't come to commit genocide. We came to understand." She tapped her communicator. "Admiral, we have what we need. The Vorlath aren't what we thought. They've engineered themselves into a corner, and I think we might have an alternative to destroying them." As they slipped away from the facility, Laura couldn't help but wonder if humanity might have followed a similar path had Earth been just a little less challenging, had humans sought technological solutions to their evolutionary struggles rather than adaptability. Sometimes, she realized, a death world teaches mercy along with strength. Commander Samantha Wright stood before the massive doors of the Vorlath High Command Chamber, a place no alien species had ever entered by invitation. The intelligence gathered by Major Collins' team had changed everything, transforming what was to be a final destructive assault into something unprecedented: peace negotiations. "Are you certain about this approach?" asked the Zalarian ambassador beside her, his translucent skin pulsing with nervous light patterns. Samantha nodded, straightening her formal uniform. "Sometimes understanding your enemy is more powerful than destroying them." The doors parted, revealing 7 Vorlath hierarchs seated in a perfect semicircle. Their armored bodies showed signs of genetic modification beyond even their warriors' enhancements: enlarged cranial cavities, additional sensory appendages, specialized communication organs glowing beneath translucent carapaces. "You stand before us without weapons," observed the central hierarch, its voice a mechanical buzz translated through Alliance technology. "Your tactical algorithms must be flawed." Samantha stepped forward, unintimidated. "We come without weapons because we understand you now. We've seen your genetic archives. We know what you were before you engineered yourselves into perfect warriors." A ripple of movement passed through the hierarchs, the closest thing to surprise their modified bodies could express. "Your species evolved on a challenging world, like humans," Samantha continued. "But where we embraced our adaptability, you chose to eliminate it through engineering. You removed emotion, creativity, and individual thought in favor of perfect execution." The central hierarch's sensory appendages twitched. "Efficiency is survival. Emotion is weakness. Our programming ensures optimal outcomes." "Does it?" Samantha activated a holographic display showing the recent defeats of Vorlath forces. "Your perfect strategies failed against human unpredictability. Your unified consciousness couldn't adapt to our chaotic tactics. You engineered yourselves into a corner." For several moments, the chamber remained silent as the hierarchs communicated through their neural network. Finally, the central hierarch spoke again. "What do you propose, Deathworlders?" "Our surrender." "No," Samantha replied. "We propose rehabilitation." The terms she outlined were revolutionary. The Vorlath would withdraw from all conquered worlds and cease their expansionist programs. In exchange, the Alliance would share genetic science that could help the Vorlath gradually restore their species' lost adaptability and emotional capacity. "You would help us change our fundamental nature?" asked a lesser hierarch, its voice carrying what almost sounded like confusion. "We would help you remember what you once were," Samantha corrected, "before you engineered away your ability to change and grow." Over the following months, the galaxy watched in astonishment as the mighty Vorlath Empire dismantled itself. Liberated worlds joined the Alliance, bringing unique evolutionary advantages to the growing coalition. Human scientists worked alongside former enemies, developing therapies to gradually reintroduce genetic diversity into the Vorlath population. 1 year after the negotiations, a ceremony on Zilara marked the formal establishment of the Galactic Defense Network. Representatives from 37 species gathered in the Crystal Amphitheater, including a young Vorlath who had undergone the first successful emotional restoration therapy. "It is difficult," the Vorlath representative explained to Samantha, struggling with newly experienced emotions, "to feel remorse for actions that once seemed logical." Samantha nodded sympathetically. "That's part of being sentient. We all live with the consequences of our choices." From the central platform, Admiral Foster addressed the assembled representatives. "The defense network is not built on conquest or domination, but on mutual protection. Each world contributes according to its evolutionary strengths." Across the galaxy, former Vorlath military installations were being converted to research centers and cultural exchange facilities. The rigid structures were softened with Zilarian crystal gardens and Florian living architecture. On a previously conquered world being restored by Alliance engineers, a human teacher named Jason Reed worked with children from 5 different species. They played together in a simulation room designed to gently introduce them to various planetary conditions. "Why are humans so good at adapting?" asked a young Mori, its amorphous body shimmering with curiosity. Jason smiled, helping a Zilarian child adjust to slightly higher gravity. "Because our world never let us get too comfortable. We had to change to survive." A small Vorlath child, one of the firstborn with restored emotional capacity, looked up at him. "Will we learn to adapt too?" "You already are," Jason assured them. In orbit above Zilara, Captain Lisa Daniels stood on the observation deck of the Horizon, the same ship that had received the Zilarians' desperate plea years earlier. She watched the diverse fleet conducting joint exercises, humans training alongside former enemies and allies alike. When the call for help had echoed across the stars, the Deathworlders had answered. But they had brought more than just their strength and resilience. They had brought the most important lesson their harsh world had taught them. True survival depends not on dominating others, but on adapting together. And throughout the galaxy, former enemies learned to see the universe through new eyes. Deathworlder eyes that found beauty in challenge and strength in diversity.